The basis for Christians as they face a multi-faith future has to be Acts 4:12 and what it says of Jesus Christ. There is salvation in no one else, for there is no other name under heaven given among men by which we must be saved. The reason is that Jesus is Lord, not of some, but of all things and all people, of whatever tribe or nation, and at all times. And his divine authority and rule is confirmed by his uniqueness. He has no competitors, and his finality. He has no successors, to quote John Stott's memorable phrase. But it is not the uniqueness of Christianity as a system that we're to defend, but the uniqueness of Christ. For he is unique in his incarnation, which is quite different from the ahistorical and plural avatars of Hinduism, in his atonement, dying once for all for our sins, in his resurrection, breaking the power of death, and in his gift of the Spirit to indwell and transform us. Down the centuries, Christians have made this exclusive claim, and to make it has not been and is not easy. And Jesus Christ warns us against using coercive measures in spreading the good news of that claim, however. But particularly in the West, Christianity, being non-coercive and with a doctrine of final punishment that divinely endorses human freedom, has fostered a political organisation that is pluralist and liberal while remaining itself theologically exclusive. That in itself is unique. Also unique is the respect and toleration, as we understand it, and essential for the resulting pluralism, that not so incidentally has come from the Christian Puritan tradition through free spirits like John Milton and John Locke. But from a Christian perspective, 2/3 of the way through the 20th century, to many with the war in Vietnam raging, things look politically far from pluralist and liberal or theologically exclusive. Peter Berger, the sociologist, could write in 1969, "If commentators on the contemporary situation agree about anything, it is that the supernatural has departed from the modern world. This departure may be stated in such dramatic formulations as God is dead or the post-Christian era. Thus, the radical theologian Thomas Altizer tells us with solemnity of a confessional pronouncement that, quotes, we must realize that the death of God is an historical event, that God has died in our cosmos, in our history, and in our existence. And Herman Kahn and Anthony Weiner of the Hudson Institute, in their fascinating attempt to project the course of the final third of the 20th century, managed to do so with only minimal mention of religion and on the assumption that 20th century cultures will continue to be increasingly sensate, a term coined by the late Harvard sociologist Pitilim Sorokin and defined by Kahn and Weiner as empirical, this-worldly, secular, humanistic, pragmatic, utilitarian, contractual, Epicurean, or hedonistic, and the like. So that is what it seemed was the case in 1969. But since then and the 1970s, it has been seen how wrong that theory was. For worldwide, there's been an explosion of religious activity and growth, with the exception of Western Europe and Central Europe, parts of the US, and a small global band of influential intelligentsia, often Western educated. But secularization theory was correct over one thing. It did see that modernization undermined a significant amount of accepted beliefs. It was wrong, however, to assume that the loss of belief was due to secularization. It was not. It was due to pluralization. Pluralization occurs with the erosion of traditional societies. Traditional societies, by definition, have enduring worldviews and morality. They are geographically separate and protected from other societies, and so from any cognitive contamination that we explored last session. But once there are human migrations coupled with urbanization, people have to live together and interact. This means that worldviews and morality become less taken for granted. For as communication through various media increases, first printing, then telephones, after that radio, films, TV, and now the internet, so does pluralism. People are so simply and so easily made aware of other people's beliefs and morals, whether they like them or not. And pluralism relativizes. You relativize what you believe because of your home background. You actually think that you believe what you believe because of your home background. But so do people who believe differently. And you're aware of those different beliefs. The result then is an individual confronted with a range of choices from a new marketplace of beliefs and behaviours, but with no society with a tradition to guide him or her and help. For such traditional societies are being deinstitutionalised. This occurs as the institution within them disintegrates. For example, and most important of all, institutions like marriage and the family that support individuals through legislation, social expectations, and accepted norms of behaviour. They begin to break down, and gay marriage being the ultimate institutional corrosive. This forces the individual to rely simply on his or her own strengths and abilities for sexual morals and morality and family success without any social support. For many, the challenge is too great and societies themselves start to disintegrate. As Peter Berger writes, every functioning society requires a certain degree of normative consensus lest it fall apart. But when such a consensus is lost, many advocate a return to the old paths and faiths as they used to be, hence the rise of fundamentalist movements in all the religions. But also the creation of new quasi-religious extremisms like environmentalism and its anti-human deep ecology movement, and indeed atheistic secular extremism. However, this pluralizing and fundamentalizing process does not mean truth questions should be avoided. Rather, respect for other people means we take truth questions seriously, so learning from them when right, but correcting them when wrong. However, we must be careful about the word fundamentalist. It is a pejorative term because in Protestantism it has been associated with obscurantism and a lack of rational thought. But the original writers of the original fundamentals, that was an early 20th century set of essays against the destructive theological liberalism of the 19th century, were often distinguished academics. Furthermore, some of today's Muslim fundamentalists are anything but obscurantist or irrational. In the pre-conference paper, I quoted from a godfather among Islamic extremists, Sayyid Qutb. He was an Egyptian intellectual who has provided a rationale for contemporary Islamic radicalism. I should not quote him at length again, but a key part of what he says in his book Milestones is summed up where he says, people are claiming that the right to create values, to legislate rules of collective behaviour, and to choose any way of life rests with men, without regard to what God has prescribed. Qutb then says that Islam is the only system which possesses the values and the way of life capable of resisting this willful ignorance. And he is very persuasive in his analysis, but not in his solution. So where do we go from here with regard to education in such a confused Western pluralist country? Well, first, there must be, as we thought in our first session, parental choice. Secondly, there must be a primary culture for each child. Each child needs what Thiessen calls the present and particular, in which they are nurtured and from which critical openness is possible. Thirdly, therefore, we must hammer home the truth that for a society to function, it needs a primary culture with a degree of normative consensus if it is not to fall apart. So what should that primary culture be, or, as some would say, the canopy to the public square? For there is no possibility of complete neutrality. Constitutionally, Britain still has a monarch with Christian duties. And we cannot ignore national statistics. The Office for National Statistics tells us that the latest figures regarding population are, in England and Wales, 32.2 million who identify as Christian. That's 59.3%, nearly 60%. 14.1 million who identify as no religion. That's 25%. 4 million who are not stated, that's 7.2. 2.7 million Muslims, that's 4.8, nearly 5%. 800,000 Hindus, that's 1.5%. 400,000 Sikhs, that's 0.8%. 300,000 Jews, that's just 0.5%. 200,000 Buddhists, 0.4%. And 200,000 other religions, 0.4%. The latter include agnostics, 30,000, atheists, 30,000, and humanists, 15,000. All these numbers are obviously rounded up. But those numbers are very interesting. For the committed agnostics, atheists and humanists are an infinitely small percentage of the total population. So as with the issue of sexuality and sexual morals, where the number of actual homosexuals is only, you remember, 1.1%, tiny numbers of positive secularists are holding to ransom the majority of the population, with some of their demands like scrapping clear Christianity from the nation's classrooms, and the result of the so-called Commission on Religion and Belief in Public Life of the Butler Sloss Commission and her group. So obviously there must be a majority of schools where the primary culture is positively Christian. But because of the 4 out of 10 who do not identify with Christianity, we need to recover that traditional British tradition, not of an illusory absolute liberty, but of ordered liberty that a primary Christian culture generates. And that liberty has the Lockean restraints, however, against violence, sedition, total sexual license, and yes, positive aggressive atheism, but allowing other beliefs and religions. Of course, from those restraints form they take is a political decision. The debate, therefore, is not whether there are schools that satisfy believing Christian parents and that they can choose. They are a must. The debate is about how many and how we achieve this goal. And they are a must from the facts of our national statistics. Of course, when 6 out of 10 identify as Christian, we have no illusions about their personal commitment. But without doubt, many of these will be like the thousands who come to JPC's 10 carols by candlelight services. And those are thoroughly Christian occasions, with many of the words of the traditional carols in themselves evangelistic. The Bible readings powerful and clear, and a 12-minute, one hopes, thoughtful, encouraging, but also challenging address. I would not be surprised if a majority of those 6 people out of 10 in England and Wales would be among potential carols by candlelight attendees. Plus, we know some of the others. And they are the people who are queuing up to go to Christian schools in our country rather than secular schools. They are like that mother we heard about in the first session, whose child at school had no Christian instruction whatsoever. And she would have identified as no religion in the 2011 census. So something has to be done. We at JPC tried to do something in 2012. We applied for a school to be called Clayton Academy, a Christian free school, but it was unsuccessful. Many parents, both at our own church and outside in the wider community, including, yes, articulate Muslims, we know had concerns for their children to be able to have a truly Christian liberal education. And they would want to come to a school with our philosophy of education, where 50% of the places would have been for children from poor parts of Tyneside, 50% would have been for church people generally. It would have been truly liberal, with modern sciences taught, of course, but Latin, also Latin and Greek and Mandarin, but all within a Christian framework. So in February 2012, we applied to establish such a faith-based free school. In the event, we were turned down. In a July 2012 letter, the Department for Education said they were unwilling to take our application further. They had, I quote, significant concerns relating to, quote, Section 149 of the Equality Act 2010 that places a duty of care on the Secretary of State for Education to promote equality of opportunity with regard to the elimination of discrimination, advancement of equal opportunity, and the fostering of good relations. From a subsequent telephone conversation, official conversation, that Jonathan Pryke, the chairman of our group, had with the interviewing panel chairman, he was clear that their issue particularly related to Christian sexual ethics. The amendments to our application that the DFE would want if we reapplied, as we would like to have done, would require us, Jonathan Pryke said, to compromise our teaching on sexual ethics. Anything short of that would not satisfy the DFE. It needs to be noted that at the same time as we were being rejected, the DFE had approved free schools for a Muslim group whose articles of association specified that, I quote, on matters of a religious nature, the charity should be guided by the teachings of the Deobandi Hanafi denomination of the Islamic faith. We did not object to this approval, as we were assuming this group were found to be moderate on contentious issues. However, we've only recently discovered that regarding homosexual sex, I quote, in the Hanafi school of thought, the homosexual is first punished through harsh beating, and if he or she repeats the act, the death penalty is to be applied. There seems therefore discrimination against us as Christians, with our mainstream views of sexuality and sexual morality, which are, of course, in the middle between the modern secularists on the libertarian side and Muslims on the draconian side. It is the DFE that looks like having infringed Section 149 of the Equality Act 2010. This obviously needs further exploration. But finally, how in this present multi-faith environment, and whatever its cause, should Christians think and relate to people with other beliefs and ethics? Well, in simple terms, Christians surely should start with the twofold Christian doctrine of revelation. On the one hand, that teaches that much of God's truth is accessible to all through the created order and through the human conscience. This general revelation, as it is called, means that Christians should believe there is truth in other religions and philosophies. Indeed, much of the content of any education will relate to this dimension of truth, which has been discovered by people of all beliefs and of all persuasions and of none. On the other hand, the Christian doctrine of revelation teaches that special revelation is important. That, of course, is where God has especially revealed himself in Jesus Christ and by the Holy Spirit, and the Bible witnesses to this, and so requires us not only to believe in Jesus Christ, but share with others reasonably and courteously our beliefs about him. So truth values can not forever be ignored. For in modern society, we must engage with those of other faiths and none. So what, if any, are the rules of engagement, whether in an educational setting or elsewhere? Well, surely there are four, and with these I must close. First, we must be aware of this common knowledge accessible to all. So secondly, we must be humble and realise that none of us has all the truth. But thirdly, we must remember our great duty is to show Christian neighbour love to the person or group of people with whom we are and with whom we are conversing. But fourthly, because we respect that person or that group, we must be honest and as graciously and as appropriately as possible let them know that we do believe there is no other name under heaven given among men by which we must be saved, with salvation meaning in so many ways the common good, both for now and for eternity. So obviously prayer and action are needed.